My daughter fell at my doorstep that night, bruised, trembling, and broken in ways I couldn't yet see. When she whispered, "He hit me," for his mistress, something inside me split wide open. That betrayal lit a fire in me I never thought I had. My name is Ruth Alcott. Before I go on, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know where my voice is reaching tonight, because if you're listening, maybe you'll understand what I'm about to share. Maybe you'll feel that same pulse, that one moment when everything you thought was calm shatters into something raw and real. It was a cold evening, quiet enough that I could hear the kettle hissing from the kitchen. The kind of night where the world feels small, just you, the ticking clock, and the hum of your own breath. I was folding the same old blanket I've had for 20 years when I heard a faint knock, then another, weaker. When I opened the door, she collapsed into my arms. Lydia, my only daughter, my once bright, laughing girl who hadn't visited in almost a year. Her lip was split, her cheek purple, fading into blue, her wrists scratched and trembling. "Mom," she gasped, barely catching her breath. "He hit me." For her. I didn't ask who her was. I didn't need to. Every mother knows the weight of those two words for her, for the other woman, for betrayal, for humiliation. I wrapped her in that same old blanket and helped her inside. The kettle had started to scream now, like it knew what had walked through my door. She sat there on my couch, eyes wide and glassy, her hands shaking like leaves in a storm. I wanted to scream, to break something, to run out and find him, but years of service had trained me otherwise. You don't react, you assess. I turned off the kettle, then I turned off the light. "Stay here," I told her. "Where are you going?" she whispered. "To change." I walked into my bedroom and opened the old cedar trunk at the foot of my bed, the one I hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside lay my uniform, the navy blue still sharp, the medals tucked into a small pouch at the corner. The smell of old leather and iron memories filled the air. I ran my fingers across the fabric, feeling the weight of who I used to be. Then I slipped it on, slow, deliberate, one button at a time. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a retired officer or a grieving mother. I saw a woman who'd once led soldiers through fire and had forgotten what she was capable of. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. The voice on the other end answered after one ring. "Ruth, it begins now," I said, and I hung up. When I returned to the living room, Lydia was asleep, curled into herself, her breath still shaky, the blanket pulled up to her chin like a shield. I watched her for a long moment. The same little girl who used to climb trees barefoot and collect pebbles in her pockets now looked like she'd been caught in a war she never signed up for. I made myself a cup of tea and sat near the window, staring into the darkness outside. The road beyond my porch was empty, but I could almost feel the world shifting. Somewhere out there, a man was sleeping, soundly thinking he had destroyed her. He didn't know what he'd awakened. I'd spent years waiting for peace tending my garden, reading old war novels, pretending I'd outlived my battles. But peace isn't a permanent thing. Sometimes it just hides until something drags it back out into the light. That night, as rain began to fall softly against the window, I whispered to no one in particular, "You shouldn't have touched her." My voice was steady. My hands didn't shake. For the first time in years, I felt the rhythm of purpose again, that cold, calm certainty that used to carry me through nights far darker than this one. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And as I sat there watching the storm roll in, I thought maybe peace was never the goal. Maybe this was always waiting for me, one last mission before the quiet returned. The night stretched on longer than usual, heavy and endless, the kind of night that makes you measure your life in memories instead of hours. I sat near the window, watching Lydia sleep on my couch, and every rise and fall of her chest felt like a borrowed mercy. The bruises on her face looked older than they should have been. They'd been there before tonight, I just hadn't seen them. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. She used to hate when I did that, said it made her feel like a child. But tonight, she didn't stir. She just breathed softly, like a small bird finally safe from the storm. And as I looked at her, a quiet truth pressed down on me. I had failed her long before Daniel ever did. I wasn't always this quiet woman in an old house. Once, I wore command on my shoulders and iron in my voice. Major Ruth Alcott, 2nd Division Military Intelligence. My life had been a map of orders, deadlines, and missions precise and unyielding. I used to say duty came first, family second, and Lydia grew up learning how to salute before she learned how to rest her head on my shoulder. She was 5 when her father left. I told her he was away on assignment. Truth was, he'd had enough of living with a soldier who couldn't stop marching even at home. By the time Lydia turned 10, I was more familiar with coordinates than bedtime stories. When I finally left the service, she was 19, independent, bright, and distant. She'd already found someone, Daniel Wells, a young man with polite manners and a politician's smile. The kind of man who looked everyone in the eye but never let you see behind his own. I remember the first dinner he came over. Lydia was glowing, hopeful. He called me ma'am twice too many times, and when I asked him about his ambitions, he said, "I don't chase goals, Mrs. Alcott. I attract them." Something in that line felt too rehearsed, too slick. But Lydia laughed, and I didn't want to be the one to dull her light. So I stayed silent like a coward who mistakes love for letting go. After she married him, I rarely saw her. Photos on social media filled the space between us. Vacations, dinner parties, fake smiles polished for the world. She looked happy enough, and I let myself believe it, because believing it was easier than asking questions I wasn't ready to face. Sometimes she'd call always short conversations. "I'm fine, Mom. We're busy. Daniel's been traveling." And I'd nod into the silence like a fool who wanted to think her daughter's voice meant safety. But mothers always know when something's wrong, even if the world insists otherwise. There was a tremor under her laughter the last time she visited, months ago. She wore long sleeves in June, said the house was chilly. I noticed the bruise then, faintly visible at her wrist. I told myself it was nothing. Now I realized that nothing was everything I failed to protect her from. The house creaked as the wind picked up. The clock struck midnight. I poured another cup of tea and sat across from her, watching the fire in the hearth fade to a slow red glow. Every ember reminded me of the years I'd burned through without looking back, my medals, my missions, my empty house. All those quiet years, spent surviving instead of living. I'd trained men to fight, to endure, to never surrender. But when it came to my daughter, I'd surrendered too soon. I reached for my old notebook, the one I'd kept from my service years. It was worn at the edges, the pages filled with tactical notes, coded numbers and names long buried in memory. I flipped through them slowly and something stirred. Not vengeance, not rage, purpose. If war had taught me one thing, it was this. You don't always fight with guns. Sometimes you fight with patience, sometimes with silence, and sometimes with truth. I tore a fresh page from the notebook and wrote down one word, Daniel. Below it I began a list, dates, times, small details Lydia had mumbled in her half-sleep, places she'd mentioned months ago, clues, patterns. It wasn't planning, not yet. It was remembering how to think like a soldier again. The rain softened to a whisper outside, and I felt my heartbeat slow with it. I walked to the couch, pulled the blanket higher over her shoulder, and whispered, "You're home now, baby. No one's ever gonna hurt you again." Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't wake. I turned off the lamp and stood there in the dark, listening to the sound of her breathing, soft and steady now. For the first time in years, I wasn't just Ruth the retiree, or the lonely woman tending her roses. I was a mother again, and this time, I wasn't going to fail the mission. Morning came late that day. The clouds hung low, heavy with rain that refused to fall, as though the sky itself couldn't decide whether to weep or hold its breath. Lydia was still asleep when I walked into the kitchen. Her face looked softer in the morning light, the bruises less angry, the cuts drying to faint lines of defiance. But pain has layers, and the worst ones don't show on the skin. I made breakfast, oatmeal and tea, simple, quiet food that didn't demand words. When she finally woke, she looked disoriented, like she'd dreamed of another life and was disappointed to still be in this one. "Morning," I said softly. She nodded, her voice a whisper. "Morning." I handed her the cup of tea. She cupped it like a fragile thing that might spill if she breathed too hard. We sat at the table in silence for a while, mother and daughter, two strangers sharing the same blood. Then I said, "Tell me." She looked up, startled. "Tell you what?" "Everything." Her lip trembled. She shook her head. "You don't want to know, Mom." "Yes," I said, "I do." And she told me. The words came in waves, slow at first, then breaking all at once. How it started with subtle things. Daniel checking her phone, asking who she was texting, accusing her of flirting with coworkers. Then came the shouting, the slammed doors, the "I'm sorry, but you made me angry" apologies. And then the mistress. "She works with him," Lydia said. "I found messages, pictures." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "When I confronted him, he said she was just a distraction, that I should have been enough for him to not need one." I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. She went on, tears streaking through words that had waited too long to be spoken. "He hit me that night, said I embarrassed him, said I should learn to be quiet if I wanted to stay married." She stopped, eyes fixed on a crack in the table. "He apologized the next day. He always does. He buys me flowers and says he didn't mean it, and I keep believing him." I reached out, placed my hand over hers. "You don't have to anymore." She looked up, her eyes hollow, but somewhere inside them I saw a flicker, the smallest flame of wanting to live. When she went to shower, I walked to the living room and dialed a number I hadn't used since retirement. The same man who'd answered my call last night. "Colonel Harris," I said quietly. "Ruth," he sighed, the kind of sigh that carries years of history. "You never call unless something's broken." "It is," I replied, "and I intend to fix it." He hesitated. "You're not asking for something official, are you?" "No, just information." He paused again, the silence of an old friend understanding without needing explanation. Then he said, "Give me a name." "Daniel Wells, financial sector, Chicago, married to my daughter." I could almost hear the tapping of keys on his end, the quiet hum of old systems still alive somewhere in a basement office. "I'll see what I can find," he said finally. "I need everything," I told him, quietly. "Understood." I hung up, slipped the phone into my pocket, and exhaled for the first time in hours. When Lydia came back, her hair damp, wearing one of my old sweaters, she looked years younger, like the girl who used to chase butterflies in the backyard, yelling, "Catch me if you can, Mom." I smiled faintly. "How do you feel?" "Lighter," she said. Then after a pause, "But scared." "That's normal," I said. "Fear just means you survived something you weren't supposed to." She gave a weak laugh, then her expression softened. "You always sound like a movie hero, Mom." I chuckled. Heroes are just people who get tired of watching the same story repeat itself. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the wind stir the leaves. The world felt different, now sharper, more awake. Every rustle, every shadow seemed to speak. Inside, Lydia was humming faintly to herself. It was off-key, fragile, but it was a sound of life. I thought about Daniel, the way men like him hide behind charm and confidence, counting on fear to keep their secrets safe. He didn't know he'd picked the wrong woman's daughter to break. I wasn't sure what I'd do yet, not entirely, but I knew the steps would come one by one. They always do when you've spent your life planning missions that never fail. The first was information, the second timing, and the third, well, that one would depend on what I found. When the phone finally buzzed in my pocket hours later, I didn't hesitate. A message from Harris, just 4 words long. "You were right, bad man." I looked at the glowing screen for a long time, then slipped it away. I turned toward the house, the light from inside warm against the dark. Lydia was there, alive, healing. I'd fought wars for my country once, but this time I was fighting one for my daughter. That night, after Lydia fell asleep, I couldn't close my eyes. I sat in the dim glow of the lamp, staring at the wall where my medals hung small, shining ghosts of who I used to be. Each one had a story. Each one carried blood I never talked about. And as the house settled into silence, I realized something that made my chest ache. The face of the man who once betrayed me in uniform looked a lot like Daniel's. It was 20 years ago, in another kind of war. Back then, I trusted my commanding officer, Captain Harrow. He had the same easy confidence Daniel wore like armor, the kind that made people lean in when he spoke, the kind that made women ignore their instincts because he smiled just right. We were on a field operation intelligence recovery, classified documents, sensitive names. I led the retrieval unit. He oversaw communications. But when the mission went wrong, when the enemy caught wind of our presence, he blamed it on me. Protocol breach, he'd said, standing there in front of the board, clean uniform, calm voice. He handed them a report full of lies, and they believed him. I was demoted, quietly. No hearing, no chance to defend myself. My men stood by me, but their words weren't enough. Hera went on to a promotion. I went home with nothing but a discharge letter and a file marked, reassigned for conduct review. It took years before I stopped dreaming of that day, the room full of smoke and silence, the sound of betrayal echoing in my ears. That was when I promised myself never again to trust charm over truth, never again to stand still when something rotten hid behind a smile. And yet I had. I let Daniel slip through the same cracks. I saw the arrogance, the control, and I said nothing because I didn't want to be the overbearing mother, the soldier who couldn't put her gun down. Now the ghosts of that mistake were back, different faces, same sickness. The next morning, the air smelled like rain. Lydia was sitting by the window, wrapped in my old shawl. She looked calmer, but her eyes were distant. "He called last night," she said softly. My heart tightened. "What did he say?" "That he wants to talk. Said he misses me, said he just lost control." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "He said if I come back, he'll forgive me for running." I felt something cold crawl up my spine. "Forgive you?" I repeated quietly. She nodded, eyes fixed on her tea. "He makes it sound like everything is my fault." I took a slow breath, the kind you learn before you pull a trigger. "You're not going back," I said. She didn't answer, just stared out the window. The silence between us stretched, heavy with unspoken fear. Then in a voice so small I almost missed it, she whispered, "What if he finds me?" I reached over and took her hand. "Then he'll find me first." Later that day, I went into town, said I needed groceries. What I really needed was to remember how to move unseen. I parked behind the post office and went to an old building with a faded sign, Archer Company Data Solutions. The company was a front I knew because I'd helped set it up years ago for fieldwork. Inside, a man with graying hair and sharp eyes looked up. "Ruth Alcott," he said, smiling faintly. "Didn't expect to see you again." "I need a trace," I said quietly. "Phone number, Daniel Wells." He didn't ask why, just nodded, his fingers already dancing across a keyboard. "Still using the same encryption pattern," he muttered. "Amateurs never change." Then he looked up. "Got him. You want his call records too?" I nodded once. He handed me a flash drive 10 minutes later. "No charge," he said. "You saved my skin once. Consider it paid back." I slipped it into my pocket and walked out into the rain. Back home, Lydia was sitting on the couch, flipping through old photo albums. She looked up as I entered. "You went out?" "Just for a bit," I said, setting the groceries down. She smiled faintly, holding up a picture. "You remember this?" It was her 8th birthday, frosting on her nose, missing front teeth, eyes full of joy. I smiled. "You were a handful." She laughed softly. "Still am." The sound filled the room with something I hadn't felt in years, warmth. But beneath it, I could still feel the storm building. That night, as she slept, I plugged in the flash drive. I scanned through call logs, messages, GPS locations. Daniel wasn't just calling his mistress, he was tracking Lydia's phone. My hands clenched. He wasn't sorry, he was hunting. I sat back, breathing slow and deep, and whispered into the stillness, "You've made your last mistake, Daniel." Then, out of habit, I reached for my old pendant, a small silver star engraved with the word resolve. A gift from my unit before they disbanded. I hadn't worn it in years, but that night I put it around my neck again, because I knew what came next. He thought he was the hunter. He hadn't met me yet. Some wars are fought in daylight. Others are fought in silence behind screens, through calls, through patience that cuts deeper than bullets. I'd learned long ago that revenge burns fast, but strategy lasts. So I didn't strike first. I waited. I watched. I planned. By the end of that week, I had everything I needed. Colonel Harris had sent me Daniel's records, bank accounts, travel logs, business transactions. The picture they painted was uglier than I expected. Daniel wasn't just cruel. He was greedy. My He'd been embezzling funds from his own firm, rerouting client money through offshore accounts, paying hush money to partners who knew too much. The mistress? She wasn't just another woman. She was part of it, a co-conspirator. Harris called me that night. "You've got enough to bury him, Ruth," he said quietly. "What's your move?" "Not burial," I replied. "Exposure." The next morning, I printed everything, every transfer, every falsified signature. I slid the papers into a sealed envelope. No name, no address. Just the company logo printed on the corner. Then I mailed it, anonymous, straight to his firm's ethics board. The kind of evidence that doesn't scream at whispers and lets suspicion do the rest. Lydia was outside that afternoon, sitting on the porch steps, watching the road with wary eyes. "You think he'll come here?" she asked. "Eventually," I said. "Men like him always do. They can't stand losing control." She nodded, arms wrapped around herself. "What if he tries to hurt you?" I smiled faintly. "Then he'll find out what a mistake that is." She gave a shaky laugh. "Still the soldier." I shook my head. "No, just a mother who's done being silent." That night, I sat in my study with a cup of tea and my notebook open. The rain had returned, tapping against the window like a steady metronome. Every mission needs timing, I reminded myself. You can't force an enemy's move. You make him believe he's making it on his own. So I waited. 2 days later, he took the bait. The call came at 8:43 p.m. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "Ruth." His voice slithered through the line, calm but brittle. "I know she's there." "Who is this?" I asked, playing along. He laughed softly. "Don't do that. I know exactly what you're doing. You think you can turn her against me. You think you can hide her." I stayed quiet. Silence is power. It makes men like him fill it with their own arrogance. He went on, voice rising. "She's my wife, Ruth. You don't come between a man and his wife." My hands didn't tremble. They'd learned better years ago. I said simply, "You already did that yourself." A pause, then low and cold. "If she doesn't come home by tomorrow, I'm coming to get her." "Good," I said. "I'll have the porch light on." And I hung up. I called Harris. "He's coming." "I'll make the call," he said. "You sure you want to do this your way?" "There's only one way I know." That night, I checked the locks, then the camera I'd quietly installed outside the porch. Lydia was asleep, finally breathing without fear. I sat near the window, the old uniform folded neatly beside me, not out of nostalgia, but readiness. By the time his headlights appeared at the end of the road, I was already standing. The rain was heavy now, sheets of water slashing through the darkness. Daniel's car stopped in front of the house. He got out, slammed the door, and started shouting before he even reached the porch. "Lydia, come out!" His voice cracked with rage. "You think you can hide behind your mother?" I stepped outside, the cold rain soaking through my shirt, and met him halfway down the path. "She's not coming out," I said evenly. He sneered. "You can't keep her forever." "You're right," I said. "But the police can." He frowned, confusion flashing across his face. Then in the distance, the wail of sirens cut through the rain. He spun toward the sound. "You called them?" 30 minutes ago, I said. "You never were hard to predict." 2 cruisers pulled up, lights painting the rain red and blue. Daniel turned back to me, fury giving way to panic. "You don't understand what you've done." "Oh, I do," I said quietly. "You thought this was about revenge. It's not, it's about freedom." The officer stepped between us, handcuffing him as he shouted Lydia's name. She came to the doorway, trembling, but when she saw him in cuffs, something inside her straightened. For the first time, she didn't cry. She just whispered, "It's over." I looked at her, rain streaking down my face like a baptism. "No," I said softly. "It begins now." Later, after the police drove away, Lydia stood beside me in the doorway. She said, "You knew he'd come." "I counted on it." She looked at me with something between awe and sorrow. "You planned everything." I nodded. Every step. And as the thunder rolled across the hills, I felt that old rhythm return, calm, steady, complete. I'd fought 100 battles in my life, but this one mattered most. Peace never comes quietly. Sometimes it arrives in handcuffs and flashing lights, and sometimes in the trembling breath after a door finally closes. That night, after they took Daniel away, the house was still. But stillness doesn't mean calm. It means your heart is too tired to keep breaking. Lydia sat in the kitchen, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed but hollow. She whispered, They said he'll be out by morning. I nodded. He'll post bail. That's expected. What if he comes back? I looked her in the eyes. He won't. The evidence I sent, it's already reached his firm. By tomorrow, he won't have the money, the job, or the reputation to hurt you again. Her lips trembled. You thought of everything. I had to. Then her voice broke. Why didn't you ever tell me you used to be a soldier? Why did you keep so much hidden from me? I hesitated. Because I wanted you to have a life without war in it. The next few days moved like smoke. Daniel was charged with assault, fraud, and obstruction. His firm cut ties and his mistress disappeared from the city overnight. The papers called it a financial scandal. I called it justice with a pulse. But as the world unraveled around him, something inside me began to weaken. The adrenaline had carried me through those nights, but now, I felt the weight settle into my bones. On the 5th morning after the arrest, I fainted. Right there in the kitchen, the kettle still whistling. When I woke up in the hospital, Lydia was sitting beside me, her eyes swollen from crying. She said nothing at first, just held my hand like a child afraid the world might end again. Finally, she whispered, "They said it's spreading, that you've known for months." I closed my eyes. I didn't want to worry you. Worry me. Her voice cracked. You went through all of this for me while you were sick? I looked at her, tears softening the edges of my voice. I couldn't let him destroy you before I was gone. The doctor came in, explained the rest. Words like stage 4 and limited time floated in the air like slow-moving bullets. But I'd heard worse. In a way, this was just another kind of battlefield, only this time, my body was the terrain. When he left, Lydia stared at the white wall ahead. Then she turned to me, her voice trembling but resolute. I'm not losing you like this. Not now. Not after everything. You're not, I said gently. You're finding me maybe for the first time. Over the next week, she stayed by my side. We talked about things we'd never said, childhood stories, her first heartbreak, the day her father left. For the first time, she asked me what it was like to be a soldier. Lonely, I said, but purpose makes loneliness bearable. And you've always been my purpose. She cried quietly. I thought I lost you when I left him, but now I realize I never really knew how strong you were. I smiled faintly. Strength isn't loud, sweetheart. It's steady. It's the hand that doesn't shake even when the world does. One evening, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name, typed neatly. I opened it slowly. Inside was a short note. For what it's worth, I didn't know you still had it in you. Consider us even. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. Daniel. I folded it once, placed it in the drawer, and never mentioned it again. That night, Lydia asked me if I regretted what I did. I thought for a long time before answering. I regret that it came to this, I said. But I don't regret standing up when it mattered. Sometimes you can't wait for peace to find you, you have to make it. She nodded, eyes wet but calm. You taught me that. The next morning, I stood outside the hospital for the first time, sunlight warming my skin. The sky was soft, a new kind of blue that felt like forgiveness. Lydia came beside me, slipped her arm through mine. Ready to go home, she asked. I smiled. Home, yes, but not just to the house, to life again. She looked at me, puzzled. What do you mean? You'll see, I said quietly. There's one more thing left to do. And as we walked toward the car, I felt something lift inside me. This fight wasn't about survival anymore. It was about ending well, leaving behind courage in the shape of a daughter who had finally learned to stand tall. That betrayal had lit a fire in me, but love gave it purpose. Peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It slips in softly through sunlight, through silence, through the way your daughter's laughter finally sounds free again. For weeks after I came home from the hospital, the house was filled with a kind of stillness I'd never known. Not the stillness of absence, but of calm after survival. Lydia stayed with me. She planted herbs by the kitchen window, repainted the porch, filled the rooms with soft music instead of echoes. Each morning, she'd bring me tea, and I'd pretend I didn't see her eyes scanning my face for signs that time was running out. I wanted to tell her not to count days, to count moments instead. So I started writing her letters, not goodbye letters, guides. One for courage, one for forgiveness, one for love. Each sealed and tucked away in a wooden box, the same one her father once gave me when we were still pretending life was simple. A month passed before the trial. Daniel's lawyer tried to claw back sympathy, painting him as a man under pressure. but the evidence spoke louder than excuses. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, Lydia held my hand. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she just breathed, a deep, trembling breath that sounded like freedom finally taking its first step. Afterward, she whispered, "I thought I'd feel revenge, but all I feel is done." "That's what peace feels like," I said. "It's quieter than you expect." That night, she made dinner the same lentil stew I used to cook when she was little. Halfway through, she said softly, "You know, you don't have to keep being strong for me anymore." I smiled. "Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm being strong because of you." She leaned over, rested her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in years, we just were. No fear, no running, no pretending. Weeks turned into months. The doctor said my body was slowing down like an old clock, still ticking, but gently losing time. But I wasn't afraid. I'd spent years preparing for war. This time, I wanted to prepare for peace. So I began to teach Lydia the little things I'd never said aloud, how to find her way home in a storm by watching the trees, how to tell when someone's lying by their eyes, how to trust herself more than anyone else. Every lesson was a goodbye disguised as guidance. She caught on eventually. "You're teaching me how to live without you," she said one afternoon, voice trembling. I looked at her, so much light where there once was fear. "No," I whispered. "I'm teaching you how to live like me, but freer." One evening, near sunset, I asked her to take me to the hill behind the house, the one overlooking the river. We sat there, the air sweet with pine, the sky gold and tender. "I used to come here when you were little," I said. "Watched you run down that path, tripping over your own feet. You always fell, but you always got up." She smiled faintly. "I guess I got that from you." "Maybe," I said, "but I hope you also learn to stop running sometimes." She looked at me, eyes soft with grief. "You're not scared?" I shook my head. "No, I've seen enough of fear. It gets boring after a while." We sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that says everything words can't. A week later, I woke up early, the house still wrapped in dawn. Lydia was asleep on the couch, an open photo album on her lap. I walked quietly to my study and left a note on the desk. It said only this: "My war is over. Yours is just beginning the war to live fully, to love bravely and to forgive completely. Don't mourn me, my girl. Remember me when you stand tall." Then I put on my old uniform, just the jacket, and stepped outside. The sun was rising, soft and golden, touching the world like a blessing, and for the first time in years, I felt truly light. When Lydia found me later, I was sitting on the porch, the morning light across my face, the old uniform gleaming faintly, peaceful, still. She didn't scream. She didn't fall apart. She just knelt beside me, took my hand, and whispered through her tears, "You did it, Mama. You won." A year later, she reopened my old house as a shelter for women, the Ruth house, a place for those who had nowhere else to go, where healing could begin in safety. On the wall above the entrance, she hung my photo in uniform, and beneath it, my words carved into stone. "Some wars are fought to end pain. Others are fought to begin peace. And so the story ends. Not in darkness, but in dawn. Because sometimes, victory isn't about defeating someone. It's about freeing the people you love from ever needing to fight again." That betrayal lit a fire in me I never thought I had. But in the end, it wasn't revenge that defined me. It was love, the quiet kind that keeps burning long after you're gone.